Thank you very much, Presiding Officer. Against a background of continuing global economic difficulties, over the next 2 weeks, around 2,000 nations, parties to the United Nations Framework Convention on Climate Change, the UNFCCC, will meet again in Durban, South Africa, to continue negotiations on international action to tackle global climate change. Climate change is certainly a huge environmental threat to the international community, with the poor and vulnerable, and particularly developing countries, being worst affected. But climate change is also a huge threat to the global economy, and unchecked, it is reckoned it could cost between 5 and 20% of global GDP. At the Copenhagen climate talks 2 years ago, Scotland presented its strategy of acting as a model of best practice on climate change. This Parliament, having unanimously agreed a world-leading target of 42% cut in emissions by 2020 in the Climate Change Scotland Act 2009, with strong support from business and civic society. Despite the strong commitment shown by Scotland and others, there was no breakthrough at Copenhagen. Our hopes for a single, global, legally binding climate change treaty now rest on making steady progress year by year in constructing the building blocks for a treaty to be agreed at some, hopefully not too distant future date. Scottish ministers were determined not to let the disappointment of Copenhagen dilute our commitment. We had already moved on from seeking high ambition to putting in place the framework for delivery. Annual targets, so we could say year on year how we propose to meet our 2020 goal. Proposals and policies to drive down emissions. Plans for public engagement and research on consumer behaviours. An international interest in Scotland's climate change commitments and programmes continued to grow. At last year's UNFCCC summit in Cancun, Scottish ministers had a place on the UK delegation for the first time. As well as working with the UK Secretary of State on the UK team, we began work to strengthen our support for developing countries, progressing our partnership with the Maldives with the funding of a study by Robert Gorban University into the marine energy potential of the islands. That study has now been finalised and will help the Maldives government's development of their renewable energy strategy. We've also launched international partnerships with the Inter-American Development Bank and the Global Carbon Capture and Storage Institute, and began discussions with Malawi to explore how we could build on a renewable energies pilot by Strathclyde University, funded under our International Development Fund. Now, of course, in these hard economic times, while people throughout the world do understand the environmental and moral messages about the need to act on climate change as a matter of climate justice for developing countries, people are naturally concerned about jobs. Scottish Government believes the evidence from Scotland demonstrates the powerful jobs, investment, trade and economic growth potential of the low-carbon economy. In Scotland, we have a GDP of around 100 billion, with a low-carbon market of around 8.8 billion, which is forecast to rise to some 12 billion by 2015-16, thus representing more than 10% of the Scottish economy and more than 5%, around 5% of the workforce. This market is already worth 3 trillion, that's 3 million globally, and is forecast to increase in value to 4.3 trillion by 2014-15. With 25% of Europe's offshore wind and tidal energy resource, 10% of Europe's wave potential, and its largest offshore storage capacity for carbon dioxide, Scotland has a unique competitive advantage in the low-carbon economy. This market offers a broad range of opportunities across the economy for Scotland and includes sub-markets of renewable energy, low-carbon technologies and environmental and clean technologies. Our strategy is to encourage investment and jobs by remaining at the forefront of development of regulatory frameworks for clean energy technology. We believe that the competitive advantage lies at being the forefront of technological innovation. I will.
Mr. Harvey.
I wonder if the Minister accepts that such a clear and unremitting focus on the economic benefits that he seeks to gain from low-carbon technologies will be seen as coming at the expense of the moral responsibility that we talked about when we passed the Act, if he decides that Scotland should use carbon credits to meet what were intended as domestic targets for reducing emissions.
Stewart Stevenson.
I hope the member was listening when I was in front of committee earlier this week. It is not a plan of ours to use carbon credits, but any country that does use carbon credits has, of course, a choice in the nature of the credits. And if credits were to be used by a country, I think it would certainly be important for that country to consider that the credits deliver a benefit to the developing world as a way of managing issues in that country. So credits can be used to deliver a moral and social purpose if a country believes that they need them. But we are not in that position at this stage. Strategic approach has attracted major international investors such as Mitsubishi, Iberdrola, Gamesa to set up global R&D centres in Scotland. And over the past year, there has been further growth in international interest in Scotland's progress on low carbon. David Cameron has thanked the Scottish ministers for their support for greater ambition within the EU on climate change to drive green investment, and has acknowledged that Scotland has good examples to share of progressive climate policies delivering jobs and investment. At the invitation of the UK Government, we've provided low-carbon case studies to assist them in their international influencing efforts. And indeed, we use them ourselves. But don't just take David Cameron's word for it. There are some here who might be reluctant to do so. That it is Scotland that's setting the pace on international action. The First Minister was recently awarded the International Climate Leadership Award for the South Australia Government. A part of Australia that has, in the Southern Hemisphere, very much been taking the lead on the climate change agenda under the previous premiership of Mike Rann. With cooperation from the UK Government, I've been taking Scotland's economic messages on low carbon to colleagues in Europe. I've met ministers from Denmark, Poland, Hungary, Romania, Bulgaria, Slovenia, Latvia, Estonia and Malta to share the Scottish experience of low carbon jobs, investment and economic growth. These messages about the jobs potential have been very warmly received. And clearly, there are opportunities for cooperation. There's an unprecedented level of international engagement by Scottish ministers on climate change. This will continue in Durban, where I will be part of the UK ministerial team, where we will continue demonstrating how we are making the low-carbon economy a reality, demonstrating how our leadership in low carbon is resulting in jobs and growth, even in these stretched financial times, demonstrating that investment now will lead to both energy security and lower costs to consumers in the long term. A Scottish Government official will also work with the UK team on the UN's capacity building work stream, an issue of key importance to developing countries, Mr Harvey may care to note. We plan to further strengthen our support for developing countries in line with our new profile in the world. There are significant positives on which to build. There is now an agreed aim of limiting the global temperature rise to no more than 2 degrees Celsius. Although current emissions reduction pledges are not nearly enough to achieve this, there needs to be a lot more work to break out of the current low-ambition standoff of major international players. Scotland's not alone among countries setting high ambition. The UK, Germany and Denmark have also committed to high targets for 2020, and the Australian Government is introducing carbon legislation. And there are good examples in China, in India and the United States of actions that are helpful. Despite the slow progress towards a global treaty, it has also to be said that these other countries who are not yet adopting these formal targets are nonetheless making investments in low carbon where they see economic benefit. And we can expect countries like China and India in particular to continue to do that to an increasing degree in the years to come. Scotland has been an active member of the Climate Group States and Regions Alliance for many years, and this highlights that many progressive policies and actions are being delivered at subnational and local levels of government, including US states like California and Texas. The leadership of the EU and the UK is another invaluable asset. The EU has said it's open to a second commitment period for the Kyoto Protocol after 2012, and this keeps the way open for other parties to make similar commitments. But time is short. We don't expect a breakthrough at Durban. With global emissions at an all-time high, we've only a short span of time to get emissions on a downward track, allowing for the time it would take for countries to ratify a new treaty. Therefore, my message when I attend UNFCCC in Durban as part of the UK delegation will be that it is imperative that the massive opportunities that this fundamental shift in the global economy will bring are not missed. We believe that action is needed now to grasp the opportunities being presented through higher ambition on emissions reduction, to drive and incentivise investment in new low-carbon markets and deliver on energy security, environmental and climate justice objectives. The evidence from Scotland already shows that investment is happening and that Scotland is already securing competitive advantage through new technologies and markets. Other countries should follow suit. In addition, I feel it's imperative that Scotland continues to articulate to the international community that as an industrialised country, we have a moral obligation to act on climate change and to influence others worldwide to do the same. Many countries are, of course, far less fortunate than we in Scotland are, do not share our wealth of natural resources and renewable energy potential. Sharing our knowledge and information, creating partnerships between academic institutions, working with countries likely to be disproportionately affected by climate change, supports our overall approach to international development and supports developing countries in a transition to a low-carbon economy appropriate to their circumstances. The Scottish Government is giving clear direction and support to the development of the low-carbon economy. It is why similar action should take place in Europe and across the globe, why we must work together to ensure that we grasp the low-carbon economic opportunity. I move the motion in my name.